Like most of corporate America, professional sports leagues and teams have become increasingly beholden to left-wing causes. Major League Baseball is no exception, with its annual Pride events at ballparks and its decision to pull the 2021 All-Star Game from Atlanta in response to Georgia's election integrity laws. While Major League Baseball's commitment to these causes is mostly symbolic, a recent report from National Review found the majority of its teams directly promote and even helped fund groups that promote gender transitions for children. How did the national pastime go from peanuts and Cracker Jacks to gender surgeries on children? Joining me now to discuss this is the author of the National Review story, Nate Hochman. He's an ISI Fellow at National Review. Nate, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me, Joseph. I appreciate it.
Well, we're grateful to talk to you about this. This is an important but under the radar story. Tell our viewers and listeners what you found.
Sure. So I spent the last couple of weeks digging into exactly what kinds of LGBT activist groups and medical clinics, Major League Baseball franchises and teams were funding under the auspices of these LGBT-themed Pride Nights that 29 out of 30 MLB teams have every single year now. The only exception, the only MLB team that has never held an LGBT Pride Night is the Texas Rangers. Every other team has held one. And 20 out of the 29 teams that have held one, I found, were funding groups that were either promoting sex changes for children as young as 12 years old, or medical clinics that were actually providing them themselves, sometimes to the tunes of tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, and often with the money that they actually generated from ticket sales. So despite the fact the MLB fan base is much more conservative in a lot of ways than the NBA or the NFL, oftentimes their money that they're spending on ticket sales is going directly to fund medical, irreversible sex changes for young children.
Now, obviously, Major League Baseball is not advertising this, but the question is, does Major League Baseball even know that this is what they're doing with their funds? Because my assumption would be, and we've seen many examples of this in the corporate world, where essentially the LGBT kind of mafia comes and says, unless you give us money, we're going to ruin your reputation and tell people you're anti-gay. But if you give us money, then we'll just go away quietly and leave you alone. Do you think that's what's happening here? Or does Major League Baseball actually know what they're doing?
Well, it's a combination of both. But to your point, Joseph, the Texas Rangers, who are the only team, as I mentioned, that have never had a Pride Night, have come under enormous fire from powerful LGBT groups for not giving in and having a Pride Night. So it's enormously courageous of that one MLB team to resist this. But I think a lot of the other MLB teams, like a lot of corporate leaders, they're not necessarily far left ideologues. They're just driven by incentive structure. And from their perspective, they're going to get a ton of grief. They're going to get threatened by their sponsors. They're going to get threatened by powerful activist groups with a lot of power in the media if they don't actually send money to a lot of these activists and medical clinics that are doing these sex change surgeries. And they probably don't really know the extent to it. They just figure that it's less of a headache to fund it. So a lot of times I think these corporate leaders are just sort of signing bills, and the activist groups are actually the ones that are directly involved with what's happening on the ground.
Well, that being said, your article points out that the website for Major League Baseball has a social justice section, and it boasts, it includes text from the 1619 Project, and White Fragility, which is a terrible book that I did actually get through at one point, but it's kind of important. It also promotes authors such as Ibram X. Kendi and Angela Davis. Why in the world is Major League Baseball doing this on their website?
That's a very good question. And I think this is the kind of question that every conservative and frankly just sane MLB fan should be asking, not just of their own personal team, but of the national MLB organization. This is America's pastime. And as I was mentioning, the plurality of fans of MLB and a lot of teams are Republicans and conservatives in red America. So this is the kind of thing that MLB is getting away with, partially because I think a lot of fans just don't have the time to pay attention to exactly where their money is going, whereas a lot of the activist groups on the left are actively pressuring MLB organizations to do this. So the MLB, like any number of corporations in America, has hired any number of diversity and inclusion and equity officers and bureaucrats over the course of the last few years who have set about implementing a lot of these changes. They're the ones who developed that part of the website and are recommending, avowed communists like Angela Davis on the website. And they're the ones who are funding a lot of these groups. But it's up to fans, including the fans who basically make up the revenue stream for the MLB, to actually push back and say that this is unacceptable and that there will be consequences if they continue to capitulate to this stuff.
And that's one of the challenges, because we've seen things like this happen before. We've seen Coca-Cola go through it. We've seen Disney go through it. And there's always this sense that the consumers have to do something about this. But of course, consumers have a lot better things to do with their time in general than to kind of follow the money trail of which business did I spend my money at? And then what did they do with that money, right? Nobody has time to do that all the time. Is there really a way to solve this?
I think consumers are part of it, but to your point, Joseph, they're not the only thing. I mean, I think a huge part of this is turning this into an actual movement that changes the incentive structure for organizations like the MLB so that they realize that they're actually going to get more grief from the right and from conservatives than they are going to get from the left and from progressives. And part of that certainly is consumers putting pressure on these organizations, but part of it is politics. I think what you saw with Ron DeSantis in Florida, when he actually inflicted penalties upon Disney for getting on the wrong side of conservatives with public policy, and actually demonstrated to Disney that there are going to be political consequences if they try to inflict this stuff on Florida's children. That's got to be part of the discussion as well. So I think it happens at both the elite political and the grassroots level. You have to have a mass political movement where consumers are actually starting to pay attention to this stuff. But you also have to have courageous politicians and leaders at the elite level, like Ron DeSantis, who are willing to take the fight to these organizations. And those two things, I think, working in coordination with one another is the only thing that's going to be able to actually shift the incentive structure.
That is a really good point. And Nate, we're basically out of time, but you did reach out to the teams and no one responded. Is that correct?
Not as of yet. I haven't heard back from any of them. So,
well, it will be interesting to see if some of them do. Nate Hochman, National Review, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate it.